So a couple weeks ago, I went to the MoMA and I saw in the main atrium this work, which is Refik Anadol's Unsupervised. This is a really large and imposing work. It's kind of the first thing you see at the museum, and it really draws you in. So the online exhibition catalog says this: "What would a machine dream about after seeing the collection of the Museum of Modern Art? For Unsupervised, artist Refik Anadol, born 1985, uses artificial intelligence to interpret and transform more than 200 years of art at the MoMA. Anadol trained a sophisticated machine learning model to interpret the publicly available data of MoMA's collection. As the model walks through its conception of this vast range of works, it reimagines the history of modern art and dreams about what it might have been." So that's a lot of big talk. In this video, I'm going to critique the work of art. I'm going to talk about what it actually is, how it succeeds and how it's interesting, and how, in my opinion, it fails. So this project is largely based on a machine learning algorithm developed at NVIDIA, and the algorithm is called StyleGAN2. So obviously this model is very complicated, but at a basic level, what it does is it's a computer program that you show a bunch of images of anything, basically, and it learns to mimic those images. So the original kind of example that researchers at NVIDIA were pursuing was the generation of human faces. So they fed it a whole bunch of images of human faces, and it learned over time to generate human faces. And yeah, the output is pretty terrifying, as you can see. But you can see that it generates really realistic human faces. So for artistic purposes, the most interesting thing about StyleGAN2, in my opinion, is that it exposed what's called a latent space. And so you can think about a latent space as basically the sum total of all the possible outputs that a machine learning algorithm can have. But it's organized kind of smoothly. So you can see moving through the latent space, you generate subtly different kinds of images, and you can smoothly move through them, as you can see here. So for Unsupervised, you can see that Anadol and his studio trained StyleGAN2 on the public archive that the MoMA has. So what you see on the screen is basically the algorithm traversing the latent space of what it thinks, the collection of modern art is. And conceptually, that's really, really cool. That's a cool idea. And it's really an interesting work. It fills the space with this huge screen. The colors kind of fill up the room because of how bright and large the screen is. There's a ambient score associated with it. So the work consists of multiple modes of display that are all based on the algorithm, but are kind of different visualization methods. From the interviews, I kind of got an idea of what they were calling them, but just for the sake of being complete, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to call them. So this mode is called machine hallucinations. This mode is called connective machine hallucinations. This mode is called fluid dreams. And this one is called data universe. So this video is absolutely a critique of the work, and I'm going to be pretty aggressive about it. But there are a lot of things that I like about this work. So I'm going to start off with that and then get to the more critique later. Most of what I'm talking about here is the machine hallucinations part, because I think that's the best part. Firstly, I just love how it kind of undulates on the edge of figuration. You look at it and you're kind of can make out maybe a face, or maybe a building, or maybe a similar stroke to Picasso or whatever, but it changes before you can kind of really grasp a hold of what it might be trying to render. I think that this is some of the best that this genre of art can offer. It's so cool how you can just kind of barely your brain grasps on to shapes and colors and things that you might recognize from art history, but it's just not quite there, and I think that's really beautiful. According to one of the interviews, Anadol stopped training earlier than he might have otherwise, so that the works would kind of just approach realistic representation, but not fully get there. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. Another aspect of the piece that I really enjoy is the idea that it interacts with its environment. So according to some of the exhibit materials, the work interacts with the changes in light, changes in motion, the weather in New York, and the conditions in the lobby that people are viewing in to shape the operation of the algorithm. I really like the idea of this, although it's not at all clear how exactly these inputs are affecting the algorithm, and I would be lying if I told you that like I noticed it at all without having known prior. There's an essay called System Aesthetics that kind of lays out what system art should look to be, or what the system aesthetic is, that I think is really applicable to this work. So we're going to go into it. In 1968, Jack Burnham writes in System Aesthetics, "The systems approach goes beyond a concern with stage environments and happenings. It deals in a revolutionary fashion with the larger problem of boundary concepts. In systems perspective, there are no contrived confines such as the theater proscenium or the picture frame. Conceptual focus rather than material limits define the system. Inasmuch as a system may contain people, ideas, messages, atmospheric conditions, power sources, etc., a system is, to quote the systems biologist Ludwig von Bertalanffy, a complex of components in interaction." And so you can see immediately this is applicable to unsupervised. It's interacting with the conditions around it, the weather, etc., and it deals with boundary concepts in a really interesting way. From my perspective, the environment of the work, the scale, the placement in the museum, the music, the interactions with the environment are all like attempts out of the work to escape these boundary concepts and break free of them. I think especially the placement of the work within the physical context of the museum at the very start of where you would like begin to see works of art, and the conceptual context of the museum is a really powerful way that it breaks out of the boundaries, because it's like even as we walk through the museum, its algorithmic gaze seems to follow us. We feel acutely aware of the fact that each and every work we see has been digested, hopelessly garbled, and reinterpreted by the unfeeling march of bits through the computer on the ground floor. And I think the recontextualization of the museum through that machine and through its reinterpretation is really cool. It like reframes the whole experience. Another interesting aspect of the work is the team that created it. The work is attributed to Refik Anadol, but it is also attributed to the studio that he runs, Refik Anadol Studios. And he mentions in an interview with a MoMA curator, quote, "I am part of a diverse team of 14 people who represent 14 languages and 10 countries imagining together, and Casey Rees has been a mentor." This is interesting because the studio's website lists a wide breadth of experts in various fields, ranging from data scientist and generative designer to architectural designer and sound designer/composer. In relation to system aesthetics, Burnham writes, "The scope of a systems aesthetic presumes that problems cannot be solved by a single technical solution, but must be attacked on a multi-leveled, interdisciplinary basis. Consequently, some of the more aware sculptors no longer think like sculptors, but they assume a span of problems more natural to architects, urban planners, civil engineers, electronic conditions, and cultural anthropologists." One last insight that we might take from Burnham's essay is the work of art's relationship to the productive means of society. Burnham writes, "In an advanced technological culture, the most important artist best succeeds by liquidating his position as artist vis-a-vis society. Instead, the significant artist strives to reduce the technical and psychical distance between his artistic output and the productive means of society." And nowadays, using machine learning algorithms is about as close to the productive means of society that you can get. Some of the most successful companies to have like ever existed, which is like Apple, Google, Meta, now Amazon, etc., they're doubling and tripling down on their investment in machine learning research. I mean, you can even look at like the algorithm that this is based on, this work is based on, is from NVIDIA from 2018. Like, it's very, very integrated with the productive means of society. But some critics suggest that it's too close to the productive means of society, bringing the legacies of propaganda and surveillance capitalism to the museum. In Efflux Criticism, R.H. Lawson writes, "It is the cultural work that the spectacular AI is doing to normalize surveillance systems, to turn environmentally devastating computation into something pleasing and even soothing, and to actively participate in the refinement of technologies that can and certainly will be used by the military that is the problem." So I think this argument is really important and has a lot to do with the underlying issues of generative art. I'm not going to go super into it. You should read the article if you want to. We've praised the work a little bit. Now we're going to get into some critique. So I want to start off with a critique of the work's form, and then I'm going to talk about some of the aspects surrounding the exhibition that I want to critique. All right, so first on my list of complaints is like the sci-fi kind of terminal view that the work intermittently displays. It like looks a whole lot like the type of display you would see in a sci-fi movie or like a hacker action heist movie. And I think it is really cheesy. It shows like heat maps, convolutional weights, a bunch of graphs, like weather data, stuff like that, that are actually important to the development of a machine learning algorithm and like the work that was done to create this artwork. However, it is so taken out of context so as to be like basically meaningless. Like you cannot do anything with that other than be like, oh, it looks cool. Also, like it blips and flickers like it's a CRT monitor, like the old like tube things. And I think that's just like, I don't know, it feels so disingenuous. I feel like the work is so obsessed with its own means of production that they felt the need to make up interfaces as if to say like, look, we made this with code. Like there's literally like lines of code that you might see in the definition of machine learning model, but like taken so out of context that it's just like not meaningful at all. Works that focus on their own means of production are not bad. Sometimes they are frequently good. Even works that lie about their means of production can be really interesting because it draws a contrast between the way the viewers know that the work was made versus the way the work says it was made, and can be used to critique notions of authorship and means of production of artwork in general, the studio system, art school, etc. This is not that. The urge here, which is to make a complex thing, machine learning models, appear to be more complex, or at least like differently complex than the reality of creating them, is just bad. And I think even worse, one of the stated goals of the project is to imagine how a computer should like look, or how a computer should imagine things. And I think falling back on frankly tired old sci-fi tropes and like hacker movie tropes is just such a poetic undermining of that mission. Like, why would you make this up to be worse? Like, I hate it. Anyway, so I think another issue with the work's form is the liquid dreams part of the work. It certainly doesn't look bad, and I think it's like one of the most eye-catching things imaginable. But as Travis Deal from the New York Times so brutally put it, that's the point of a screensaver, not a work of art. It's as if someone said during the development, like, yeah, the AI is cool, but what if there was a fluid simulation? At best, it distracts from the conceptual focus of the work, and at worst, it's Instagram bait. All right, formal critique is over. It's time to move to some of the stuff surrounding the exhibit. I think my strongest critique of the work is the way Refik Anadol's studio uses NFTs to package their work. For those unfamiliar, NFTs stand for non-fungible tokens. So essentially, they are little bits of code that point to an online resource, in this case, a piece of generative artwork, that can be owned by one person at a time. And they use the same mechanism as cryptocurrencies, namely the blockchain, for ensuring ownership. There are many more competent people than I in this space who can talk about NFTs and their, in my opinion, downfall. But what's important for our purposes is that NFTs are only a receipt. And the thing that you own when you own an NFT is just a receipt saying like, I own this thing. The thing itself is not on the blockchain. In fact, you can download the video that someone paid $300,000 for on the public internet. I'm not a fan of NFTs for many reasons that we're going to get into, but one of the most basic reasons is that it goes against the spirit of digital art in the first place. Everest Pipkin, a writer and video game designer that I really enjoy, I think puts this best, writing, "What digital files and digital artists do have is duplicatability. There is no original file. When I make a copy of a text document, 3D model, or game and give it to you, we both have the original. We're both having a first-hand experience. We are both engaging with the work wholly as itself, not as secondhand documentation. This is it. This is the one thing. Digital artists have media that can proliferate over a network and be held by many people at once without cheapening or breaking the aura of first-hand experience. It is the one true benefit to working in the digital space." NFTs are an attempt at breaking down this one benefit to working in digital space. It is an attempt to give one person single privileged ownership of a work. In my opinion, and I think in Pipkin's opinion, the thing that makes the work special, the thing that is unique to the nature, as Greenberg would say, of the medium of digital art is truly infinite reproducibility. Even if you can access the work of art that an NFT points to, I think that whole idea of NFTs is antithetical to the idea of digital art. Another issue with NFTs in general is the media attention and headlines detailing sales of millions of dollars. It can be tempting to look at this and say, well, digital artists are getting money. That should be a good thing for all artists everywhere, right? Unfortunately, this really has not been the case. Kimberly Parker, in her analysis of the NFT market in 2021, wrote, "These numbers do not show the democratization of wealth thanks to a technological revolution. They show an acutely minuscule number of artists making a vast amount of wealth off of a small number of sales, while the majority of artists are being sold a dream of immense profit that is horrifically exaggerated. Hiding this information is manipulative, predatory, and harmful." Another analysis states, only 1% of NFTs sell for more than $1,500. 75% sell for $15 or less. Even worse, the majority of these pieces don't even sell, so they don't enter our analyses. People just spend money to produce an NFT, and that's it. It would be hard to suggest for an art friend to play in this space and get rich in NFTs because very few people can find profit in this market. The ultra-free market neoliberal mindset that NFTs embody represent the commodification of everything. They are a tool of financialization that has historically had about as much to do with art as the etching in the face of a poker chip. Functionally, they are a tool for rich artists to get richer and for techno-positivist finance bros to gamble with. NFTs have not and never will save the art market for smaller artists. They're a tool that heavily favors already established artists, like maybe artists that have institutional support from the MoMA, and can actively harm smaller artists who need to spend money to mint their work as an NFT. I should be clear that I don't really have a problem with artists using NFTs to kind of get their money. Like, if you're going to make $1 million versus $5 million by using NFTs, that's fine. Good for them, the environmental problems with NFTs have been mostly solved, so have at it, I guess. However, this is more of an institutional critique of when artists and institutions start talking about this blatant tool of financialization as a community or as the future of art collecting and the future of the next art movement. I think that's when things can get a little darker. I think encouraging artists to get involved with NFTs and extolling the virtues of NFTs as a community and as the movement of the future, see here.
Who wants to collect historic pieces in the NFT movement? And I guess from an experiment point of view, both collecting, both creating, and community aspects discussed in the chat was a really communal experience, which is similar to our, I think, community piece, which was more accessible and inclusive to bring a new audience and experience, which was 5,000 data universe globes, which were representing the process, the project, the data and the community around MoMA and the data and the archive. So I think that 5,000 owners of that piece, and the moment of like purchasing that and watching the web page, going through these editions, totally agree that it's a form of performing arts. We have been all discussing together the idea of community in the center is very meaningful than just, other economical models.
It can encourage smaller artists to participate in a system that very rarely benefits them and in fact can actively harm them. Widespread adoption of these technologies adds attention, prestige, and ultimately capital to artists that are already successful. This is why we need to be so critical and so suspicious of these claims. NFTs are a very lucrative way for already successful artists to make money. Pretending it is anything else is dishonest and harmful. So let's get to how NFTs relate to this exhibit. As part of the exhibition, Feral File, which is a NFT marketplace, held a parallel auction of multiple versions of Unsupervised minted as NFTs. Many of them sold for as much as $500,000. The MoMA actually also participated in these auctions and received 1/6 of the profits from the initial sale. Accompanying the exhibition, there was an interview held by curator Michelle Kuo and Refik Anadol and Casey Reese, who is a generative artist who is like actually pretty groundbreaking in the 90s to 2000s to today, who owns Feral File, or who co-founded Feral File. One of the most striking sections of this interview, Michelle Kuo asks a really insightful question. She says, "Casey, you've been the conscience of digital art for a long time. You're a great artist and you have a very clear moral and intellectual compass. The tension between artists and collectors is old and complex, but do you think it has gotten even more complex in the NFT space? Could it be an opportunity for artists to also influence other spheres?" In a response that is not only disappointing, but maybe borderline irresponsible for an owner of an NFT marketplace, Reese says, "I don't feel I can answer that one." Why? Uncritically engaging in an art market that can be harmful to small artists and thrives on the type of speculation that drove 2008 is a critique of an artist that writes itself. Becoming not only an artist but an owner in that space, Feral File receives 1/6 of the initial sale, who has nothing to say about the relationship between collectors and the art market and artists. How? Ben Davis reflects on the troubling direction the art market seems to be heading. He writes, "It may be that the exact same thing that makes this genre of work commercially appealing for people buying crypto art, its untroubled technophilia, is what makes it feel flat to me as an artistic statement. The suspicion that MoMA is incentivized to fast-track this kind of art is going to linger. See 1/6 of every transaction. Sadly, the melting of commercial and non-commercial borders strikes me as more prophetic of what might be to come in art than any of the images summoned up by the machine in the gallery." While researching this video, I read a lot of reviews of this work because it's in a main area of the MoMA and there are a lot of reviews and they are overwhelmingly negative. I think the work deserves it. I think the way they used NFTs deserved it. However, I think many of these reviews kind of miss the grain of truth that is in there that speaks to the future of art and generative art in particular. The way Anadol talks about computers having vision and dreams and thinking about what different intelligences are seeing is really intoxicating to me. I think those ideas should be at the very core of what we call generative art. Despite having this kernel of this really deeply interesting idea, I think the delivery of this work fails. The work is distracted by Instagram-friendly theatrics, and the museum has opted to bring NFTs inside as a proud declaration of the further financialization of works of art. Despite loudly exhibiting its own means of production, Unsupervised has nothing to say about the legacies of surveillance capitalism and military technologies from which it was born. Taken in a more optimistic light, I hope that this work can be a stepping stone for institutions to open their doors to works that actually follow the stated goals of unsupervised. I really do think that there are really interesting things in this work, like a really interesting kernel of truth that's just kind of got bogged down in the NFTs and in the Instagram friendliness and like the fake sci-fi stuff. Like, I feel really confident that this path that this work kind of just like very briefly starts to walk down can lead to some of the most interesting works of our time. And I just only hope that like works that follow in the footsteps of unsupervised can lose some of the conceptual baggage that came with this one.